Hello, this is Josh Kobayas, and this will be my client assessment. Let's begin with the anterior view of the static postural assessment. So as this line of center, we can see that the hips are center of the line, but as we can see, the nose and the eyes are to the right of the line, which would be his left side, meaning he has a left lean, as well with the sternum also being to the left of that line. So as we can see also, the left shoulder sits a little lower than the right shoulder, suggesting a possible muscular imbalance, likely underactivity in the left upper trap or overactivity on the right. And we can also see rounded shoulders, especially in this posterior photo where the scapulars are sitting near the edge of the shoulder. And it could indicate type pectoralis major and minor, or underactive scapular stabilizers like the rhomboids and lower traps. We can also see, as we stated before, a head tilt to the right with the rotation to the left, which suggests overactive sternocleidomastoid and cervical extensors and an underactive deep neck flexor, as well with the weight distribution being off as the client does stand on the outside of his feet. From the lateral view, we notice a little bit of a forward head lean. Even though I did put the center line through the ear, we can see that the shoulders are back and the pelvis is forward, indicating that they are both shifted forward, and as well with the ankles being behind the line. This could indicate some tight cervical extensors and weak deep neck flexors, as I said previously, and we can really see the rounded shoulders here. They're not too bad, but it could imply some pec tightness and as well with weakness in the rhomboids as stated earlier. And these static postural imbalances will carry over in the dynamic assessments, especially during squat and gait. As we can see, this right arm is higher than the left arm. As stated before, with that left shoulder being lower, this could be the reason why. And once we start playing this video, we will see some shifting to the right. And if you look at the feet placement, they are pretty even, with this one being open more, but mainly these feet are a little externally rotated. As we look at the posterior view, we can see that this left foot is back a little farther and this right foot is externally rotated. And before we start the video as well, we can see that this arm is bent. So with the arm being bent, we can likely due to weaker stabilization as well with poor thoracic extension endurance. And with that right foot being externally rotated, there could be possibility of hip rotation asymmetry or ankle mobility limitations, which we will hit later. And then we also, with the weight shifting to the left, could signaling left glute med weakness, and especially right side dominance. So here I'll play these videos. And as you can see, the client does seem like all the weight is shifted over to this right leg. We'll play this one as well. And as we notice too, with this one, that the client does jolt his foot out to the right as he goes down. And we can still see that shift over that right side, especially if he gets a little stuck about halfway through the rep. So looking at the lateral side of the overhead squat, before we start, we can see this lateral line where the ankle, hip, and shoulder are not in line with the head, meaning that the head is forward and everything else is back. And we can also see the arms being bent as we go on the reps. So this rep was done first in the videos, as on the left side, and then on the right side these were taken after. So as we start the video and we pause at the bottom, we can see that the head does shoot forward, especially as soon as he starts, we can see the head begin to shoot forward as he goes down. And as I pause at the bottom, his hip crease does not pass his knee, so he gets good depth, but it's not all the way. So we can see some hip flexor tightness as well with some ankle mobility issues. And we can play this right side video as well, where he does have that forward head, a little bit of forward lean, causing maybe some low back tightness, as well as lat tightness and some core instability. And then you can see that the ankles are lined up in this one as well with this one. As we can see in the split lunge frontal view, before we start, we can see this when the left foot is forward, the back foot is externally rotated, but on this side we see that when the right foot is forward, it is pretty straight. and then as well with the line of center, I put it through the center of his pelvis, and we can see that the head is shifted over to the right of the line, or his right of the line, as well with the sternum as well. And as you can see here, before he starts, we can see the lean, as we stated before, leaning towards that side already. As we play, we can see the client does lean over that left shoulder, left leg, as he goes down, with a little bit of shakiness and instability on the way down, especially in that ankle due to limited dorsiflexion. And then we can see here where he sets up, does shift a little bit, and as you can see the instability, especially around his head as he shifts left and right of the line. So from the lateral view, we can see that the client does lean forward on both sides, a little less with the left leg leaning forward. And as we start the video, we can see on this side, we can see the right leg does come up, right ankle, and then the flexion does help itself out, but he is still a little forward, especially with the forward head carry. And as we play through, we can see that heel come up, and as we look from the right side, this heel does stay down, unlike the one on the left. And we can see that he still has that forward head carry, like we said, even during the movement, and he's more vertical. So looking at the split lunge from the posterior view, we can see that he starts out with this ankle on the left side slightly internally rotated compared to the one on the right. And we can still see the shift on the left side, with all the weight being on the left side before movement begins. But as we play, we can notice that the heel does stay down during this rep, but we also can really notice that shift with the top of his torso, as well with his hip shifting to the right, creating balance issues. And then on the right, we can see he still leans to that left side with those hips shooting to the right. And then we can also see some ankle instability on the way down with a little bit of shakiness in the left heel. So as we look at the Davies test, we can see that he does keep pretty steady hand placement, keeping this consistent width apart as he did before. And then we can also see some scapular winging at the top and a lot of sway during reps, meaning some poor core stability and anti-rotational strength. And then the winging will also show a weakness in the serratus anterior and lower traps due to the overactive pectoralis major, as well with the lats. When I was done with the previous assessments, I decided to do the dorsiflexion test to see if his ankle mobility was a limiting factor, which it was. So during his ankle mobility test, he got around 5 inches bilaterally with both sides. So they were even on both sides, but with a little bit of 5 inches of movement causing weakness in the overhead split squats, restriction of limited depth, and then the heel lift and instability. And it also contributed to poor knee tracking, causing the torso to compensate by leaning forward. And we can also see the ankle mobility was a key factor to asymmetrical loading and movement quality. So due to the lack of depth in his squat, as well with some instability in his hips, I decided to test his hip mobility with the modified Thomas test. So the test revealed that there was tightness in the iliopsoas and the rec fem, especially on the right side. So we could see that on this left side that it does get lower to the ground than the right side, indicating that the right side is tighter, as well with it's not too significant, but this right side rec fem is a little tighter than that left side rec fem. So with this restricts his hip extension in promoting anterior pelvic tilt, and which would further worsen his forward lean seen in the dynamic assessments. and his tight quads and hip flexors have prevented full posterior chain engagement, shifting the loads to his quads, and as well with the instability, the differences in the mobility on the left side and the right side was causing him to shift during his overhead squat. So now we're going to look at this lateral view of gait. So as we start with him walking to the right, we can see as he gets to about the midpoint of the camera, we do not see his left hand cross. But as we look at the bottom one, where he's walking to the left, we can see his hand go past his hips, meaning that his left arm does not swing equally, and this could be a red flag for scapular or upper body dysfunction, as well with some limited mobility and extension, with maybe that lat being more overactive than the right side. And as we could see with his toe off, he doesn't necessarily toe off too well with both feet. And then, but the right side does have a weaker toe off as it has a shorter stride, maybe because of less ankle mobility or even that hip mobility that we noticed earlier with the modified Thomas. So from the posterior view for the gait, we can see that his foot does start off externally rotated, especially that right foot pointing to hip or ankle asymmetry. And then we also could see with that right foot being externally rotated, we could see him pressing off the inside of the foot, showing some overpronation and weak intrinsic foot muscles. And both of his legs circumduct, which would make sense due to his lack of hip mobility, causing him to go around instead of up and down to get that foot clearance for foot strike. And as well with minimal arm swing and side to side sway, which could be the lack of upper body coordination and core instability, which were consistent with previous assessments, and maybe possibility of some lat tightness. And then as we can see as well, improper toe off, causing him to shorten a stride and not getting long strides and good heel strike. So in conclusion, I observed consistent right side dominance as well with limited ankle mobility, hip flexor tightness, and some core instability across all of his tests. So we can corrective strategies that we should include are some ankle mobility drills, hip flexor and quad lengthening, scapular stability exercises, core strengthening, and anti-rotational training, as well with unilateral lower body work to address the asymmetries. Thank you.